Hey everybody, I hope you've had a great festive season so far. Let's get straight into this tutorial. I want to show you how you can polish up a preset using a couple of simple little tricks in the Axe FX 3. At the moment, I'm playing my PRS SC245. It's in drop C tuning, and I have got a really simple preset dialed up at the moment. It is the Atomica High model at stock settings. I haven't touched anything. And I am using custom IR that I made that is available on Axe Change. If you go and look for it, look for my user handle 2112. I haven't touched this either. As you can see, I haven't even played around with the low cut or the room sound at all yet. So this is what it sounds like. So I actually think that sounds pretty good. That's kind of my basis for a good rock or hard rock guitar sound in the Axe FX 3 is the Atomica, and either use this IR that I made or the stock York Audio or the stock ML or Own Hammer cabs. I think they all sound really good. So once you've got that kind of dialed into where you like it, and for me, I do like this, let's have a look at a couple of cool tricks that can sort of bring this into more of like, I don't want to say better, because that seems more of like a value judgment, but more of like a record ready or a gig ready kind of tone. So I've had a few questions about this in all of my presets and why I use a particular parametric EQ block. So tip number one is using the parametric EQ block to basically pull out some harsh frequencies from the IR and to tame the low end and the high end, so that especially if you're going to play this loud, it isn't too boomy and it's not sort of like ice picky on the old ears. And I know a lot of my presets are overly bright with a lot of people who try them out on their system, so this has to be tailored to your system. You know, if you're using something like an Atomic CLR, or you're using headphones or in-ears, or you're playing through a solid state power amp and a real guitar cab, take all of this with a grain of salt and try to apply the underlying ideas rather than like the actual, you know, just copy the values. So hopefully this particular trick, this process can really help you. So what we'll do is we'll start by dialing up a parametric EQ block. And the second thing I'm going to do is chuck a looper in front of the amp, because we're going to use the looper to help us dial in tone. So one cool thing with a looper, I set the config to be automatically play when I hit record for the second time, and I like to add the crossfade. Then what I will do is turn the record threshold up. Basically, you can see this kind of blue line. I turn it up to about here, so that if I press record, it's not going to immediately start recording. It will only start recording when I start playing. So let's play that little riff again. And as you can see there, I just trimmed the end a little bit so that the loop is going to play back. So this is a trick I stole off the channel Hardcore Music Studio. Go and watch all that guy's tutorials on mixing. I really, really love his channel, but I stole this particular trick from there and I use it all the time. So this is what we're going to do if we want to find frequencies that just sound a little bit too harsh in the amp and cab sound. We can look for them using this particular trick. So choose one of these middle frequency bands in the parametric. Let's say frequency band number 2. And what we're going to do is we're going to set the Q all the way up. We'll set the EQ type to peaking, and I'm going to turn the gain all the way up. And you'll see what happens here is we get this very, very steep peak. And what I'm going to do is turn the frequency control while I play that riff, and basically just listen out for any harsh frequencies. So you may want to turn your speakers or your headphones down while I do this, because there's going to be some really purposefully ugly stuff in there. So what I'm going to do is, I normally start with this around the 3K region, because I find somewhere between 3 and 6K, there's always a couple of frequencies which are really, really annoying. So you will hear them in the clip. I'm going to sort of do this when I do them and hopefully stop and talk about them. So yeah, somewhere around 3K is normally the starting point. Let's play the riff, and we are going to have a listen out for these ugly frequencies. it always seems to be in the same spot for tones that I like to dial. You can hear there, 3.3K had this real kind of like harsh, almost like a whistle to it. And there was another one at about 5.3, 5.5K. There was a real kind of flub somewhere around the like 200 hertz frequency range. And there was some just like really crackly stuff up when I pulled it up really high. So the really low stuff we're going to deal with in a different way coming up. But for these frequencies in the middle, what I then do is I'll just pull out, say, at 3.3, maybe let's start with 2 dB. And then I will do the same thing at like 5,500. Q all the way up. So this is a really, really tight surgical cut. And I'll bring that down by 2 as well. And I mean, you can actually ease off on the Q a little bit if you like. Say, bring it down to, I guess this is all going to have to just do with personal preference, but say somewhere around 5 for the Q, which is still pretty tight. Okay, let's have a listen to what that does. If I play this riff back, it's going to be really subtle, but now I would encourage you to turn your speakers up. Let's have a listen to just those 2 cuts. So it's still leaving the kind of the guitar tone itself pretty much intact. It's just removing a little bit of that harshness from those areas. And of course, if you're in the recording studio or you're playing live, you're going to send this signal to a mixing desk, and the engineer is, especially on a recording, probably going to EQ the heck out of this to make it work with whatever the other instruments are doing. This is kind of like your bass tone that you're feeding them, and then they're manipulating that to fix the mix. So what we're doing there is we're removing those frequencies so that down the track, especially like, say in the studio, the engineer does some like real crazy EQ, with like pull techs or something like that are quite extreme on the old EQ, especially for rock and metal. Engineers do love their EQ. It's going to pull those frequencies out before they can be magnified by like EQ boosts and stuff like that. So I do like that. Basically just tunes the IR up a little bit. Another one, and you don't need to do this with the parametric EQ, even though I do, is apply a blocking filter down here, which is just going to be a high pass filter. I like to start at around 100 hertz with this, and don't touch the gain or the Q because it's pretty good. You can also do this in the cab block in the preamp section and set the low cut to 80 hertz. But I like it in the parametric section. Let's have a listen to what that does. This is kind of removing some of the flub in the low end. You may like that in your guitar tone, in which case, by all means, leave it there. Like I said, these aren't like rules you have to obey by. And I would do a similar thing with the high frequencies. You notice that as we got like above basically 7K, everything started to get super fizzy. So in a live setting, I would probably set the frequency here to about 6.5K as a starter. If I was recording, leave it at about 8K. Let's just say 8K for now. And we'll turn that into a blocking filter as well and touch nothing else. So this is basically, these are the parametric EQ settings that I use on nearly all of my patches. I have it saved as a block called Guitar EQ, and I apply that to pretty much any kind of heavy tone in there. And that is how I go about finding the frequencies. If you're using a different IR or a different amp setup, don't copy these settings, copy the process. Use that sweeping trick that I did to basically find any problematic frequencies and then pull them out in this really subtle way. So I find that's super, super handy. There was this issue though in the like sort of somewhere between, in the 200 hertzy kind of region, especially if you play a lot of palm mutes. You get this like build-up of low-end energy. And again, something else I'm ripping off from Hardcore Music Studio. And this is kind of the Andy Sneap trick. I've talked about this in other videos, but it's to apply multiband compression. This works really well for heavy tones as well. So if we chuck the multiband comp on there, what we're going to do is just zero everything out here with the thresholds for now. And then we're going to set the frequency range for the high band to be low. We're going to set the crossover frequency to about 350 hertz. That's close enough. And about 90 hertz down here. That'll do. And we'll set all the levels to 0. Again, I've covered this in depth. I have a block saved for this as well. So, but basically, again, I think the Andy settings is like the attack at about 12 milliseconds and the release somewhere at about 25. from memory, they kind of seem to work. So they're the settings that I'll work from, and then play the riff through again. And we're just going to tweak the threshold and the ratio till we get rid of that kind of got kind of sound happening in there. Actually, I'm not going to play the loop there. I'm just going to play some palm mutes. The idea is that when I'm playing open, I don't want the multiband compressor to really touch anything. When I'm palm muting, I want it to just suck a little bit of that low-end energy out so it's not building up. Again, these aren't like settings to copy per se. You have to go and tweak the threshold and the ratio to where you like them. I happen to like them there. You don't have to do a lot, but I find it really, really helps. Just as you can hear that, if you didn't hear it, go back and turn your monitors or your headphones up louder and listen to just the kind of that, 100 to 300 hertz. They're basically the region centered on these crossovers, you know what I mean? And how when I'm palm muting, there's not this like big buildup of gack in there, as I would explain it, which is going to clash a lot with the bass and the drums in a mix. So that's a really good way to basically, with the parametric EQ and the multiband compressor, fine-tune your tone without ruining the tone. I mean, when you play open chords, it sounds pretty much the same as before. Everything is just like a little bit more controlled and a little bit more focused. And articulate would be the word that I would say. If you're just sort of playing open. So that is basically one kind of very long-winded process to add some polish in the post-amp section. Basically to take a tone that you already like and in my eyes, make it more mix-ready and more usable. Better isn't the right word, like I said, because that's a bit subjective, but definitely to kind of get it into the zone where guitar should live and pull out any stuff that doesn't need to be there. Again, this isn't an additive process, it's a subtractive process. Take out as much stuff as you can without affecting the underlying tone. Okay, so we've done that. Another thing that I find works really, really well with high gain amps at least is to either use the input EQ in the amp block or to use an input boost. The input EQ is a really good one because essentially you can see here with the Atomica that there's no high cut or low cut. So if I wanted to really push the mid-range going into the amp to increase the gain, what I would do, I've covered this trick a bunch of times, set the frequency to about 800 hertz, turn the gain up, and you get this nice kind of big boost here. Then I would adjust the low cut probably to about 100 hertz. So this is a pre-EQ as opposed to a post-EQ trick. It's essentially just altering the response coming out of the guitar and making the pickups a little bit more mid-focus and a little bit less flubby coming out of the pickup. Say to about 120. This is what that does. And that's a really great alternative to using a boost pedal. The grinder boost does a really kind of similar thing. It also increases the gain a lot, but this isn't really increasing the gain. It's just increasing that 800 hertz region. Like I said, it's kind of like being able to swap out your pickups for slightly hotter pickups without having to change pickups. So I really like that trick for high gain amps. And those are the three go-tos that I use when I'm sort of doing stuff like this and polishing up a preset. Otherwise, like I said, you can leave the input EQ alone. And in the latest firmware, we've got this great grinder boost, which I love the sound of this thing. You can use any of the input boosts. Again, this is totally to taste. A Tube Screamer works really well. So does the SD1. They're another two of my faves. But with this one, turn the boost up, and it does this. Actually, I'm going to play the loop. I forgot that I got that loop sitting around. Have a listen to what this does. Very similar thing to the input EQ trick, but it's increasing the overall gain of the amp. And, you know, this is a little bit different in that it's sort of like an additive process here. I'm pushing the mids as opposed to all the post EQ, which was a subtractive process. I really like the grinder boost just because it makes everything sound a little bit gnarlier and nastier. But again, this is totally up to you. This one works pretty good on clean amps, and we are going to have a look at a couple of tricks for clean amps in a second. I promise I'll get there. Notice that I haven't touched the amp controls. I haven't touched the cab block yet. One thing that I find super handy with the cab block is using the room parameter. This is one of my favorite things in the Axe-Fx 3, coming from an AX8, which didn't have this. So if we set that to the shape to a room, and only turn the size down a little bit, and say the level somewhere at about 25%. And this is great, especially if you're using in-ear monitoring, where a lot of the time these kind of sounds can just be like too direct, for use of a better term. And this gives you the illusion of a little bit of space around the sound, which I like. So at about 23%. And take note, I'm not using the air control. I really don't like the air control with distorted sounds. What the air control does is let a bit of the DI signal, so the signal without the cab, which you would just sort of never do in a real world situation. The air control is nice with clean sounds. It gives you the sound of like blending in a clean DI. But for distorted sounds, I'd never use that. I do like the room level parameter though. Like if you crank this up, you get this. But I like it in a very kind of subtle way. It just kind of takes the edge off the tone there, which, like I said, especially if you're using in-ears or using an FRFR system, can give you a little bit more of that amp in the room kind of sound. So they're my go-to tricks to polish up a distorted preset. Let's go to like a clean amp on channel B. I'll use the same IR and I'll use the same like post settings. We probably don't even need the multiband compressor for these. But let's go to something like Blues Junior. I've been absolutely loving that amp model recently. I'll just basically turn all these controls up on the Blues Junior, and I think that sounds really good. It's a little bit loud, though. And that is breaking up a little bit and compressing a little bit. So if I was using a humbucker guitar in this kind of situation, you can hear that it's sort of pushing it a little bit too much from being a really crystalline, clean sound. One thing that I love to do, like I was saying before, with these clean sounds, if I turn the gain down even more, what ends up happening is that compared to like a distorted sound, you know, if you're using a clean sound and a distorted sound in the same patch, it's really hard to balance them out. So what I love to do is go to the dynamic section and use the output compression. You can try this guy, you know, go all out, use it at 3 to start with. And that's giving me about 6 dB of gain reduction there. Again, you can tailor this to taste, but output compression, beautiful stuff. The cathode follower section, I have to dive into this in another video. I'm not going to do it right now. But the input EQ trick, well, I was moving something that I didn't want to move there. The input EQ trick works really well here. What I like to do is turn the low cut up. Again, you know, somewhere to around 120. And then another thing is the speaker compression parameter in these amps. This works better with non-master volume amps like Plexis and the non-master volume Fenders, but if you turn the speaker compression up, this kind of, again, it's you notice that I'm using compression a lot on these amps rather than use like a compressor pedal in front of the amp. Using these amp block controls, they really impact the feel of what's going on with the clean sound, which a lot of the time when I'm sitting down with a clean amp and kind of vibing on stuff like that, that's what I want out of it, is I want that compressed response without it breaking up or getting distorted. That's really nice. And then in the cab section, you can also add a little bit of air, like I was saying before. I would also turn the room parameter up, the clean sounds up, you know, about 60%, which seems like a lot, but and then a little bit of air. And with the room parameter, of course, we can use something like the hall, which is essentially going to give us like the early reflections of a hall reverb. Turn the mic spacing up a bit as well to get more of that thing of like using a loud, clean amp in a big space. And we can turn the multiband compressor off here because it's probably not doing a lot. And ideally, what I should do for something like this, if I was using a different amp model, I would go through and fine-tune these parametric EQ spots using the same process that I used earlier in the video. So, yeah. There we go. I did mention as well, you can use the grinder boost on clean sound. So the trick here is start with the boost level all the way down, basically, and it gives us this. Which with this particular amp, I would probably go through and then turn the treble right down if I was using this and turn the bass and mid-range up, which gives us this. Which almost kind of gives the impression of like a single coil guitar, which I think is a cool trick if you're using one guitar for a gig and you do need some like slinky single coil tones going on in there. The clean sounds thing, like I said, there's a whole bunch of other tricks that you can apply to this, especially in terms of like adding effects and widening a clean sound and things like that. But yeah, this was meant to be like a 10-minute video, but I'm looking at the time going, man, 25 minutes of me sort of rattling on already. But that is how I go about polishing an already good sounding preset. You know, you probably have a bunch of presets sitting around that you really like the sound of. This and these tricks will hopefully give you some ideas to basically dial them in and make them, like I said, live ready or mix ready in different ways. And yeah, it's just a whole lot of fun to explore these advanced parameters. And this isn't about, you know, don't turn this into like, ooh, what if I turn this by like 0.01 dB. Will it sound better or worse? These are processes, not settings that you want to copy. So think of it as a process that you can apply to any preset that you've got, basically to tighten it up a little bit and yeah, get it match fit. If you enjoyed this video, go and check out all my other AXFX3 content. Please consider hitting subscribe to the channel, and I will see you all around real soon. Take care.